Ben Riggs presents D&D Out Loud, Episode 97. What if a D&D designer designed the next American government?
Greetings once again, loyal listeners to D&D Out Loud. I am Ben Riggs, and we're going to try something different this week. I spend a lot of time talking to game designers, and of course, I'm a historian and history teacher, and I'm watching the news every day. A thing I have personally become convinced of is that the United States is going to need a new constitution. And of course, I spend a lot of time talking to game designers. Game designers, it would seem to me, have a lot to say about how one might want to structure a new government in America. But I didn't know of anyone having that conversation. So I decided to try it out for myself. I managed to get 5e designer Mike Mearls together with Professor Christopher Robichaud of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government for a conversation on how a game designer might shape a new American government, and that's what you're going to hear today. If you're a regular listener to the show, I hope you enjoy what you're about to hear, and I hope that the question of how a game designer would build a new government is far enough outside the left-right dichotomy that people across the political spectrum can listen to this, and it's not going to make anybody angry, unless you get angry that I think we should have a new constitution. That'd be fair. Right now, I don't have any plans to have more conversations like this. So if you want more, you have to let me hear about it, comment to this video, share it around, and I'm attaching a link to a survey in the show notes. If you love this and want more, let us know. If you hate it, frankly, I'd like to know that too. Although, like I said, I don't have any plans to do any more right now. So if you really don't like it, you don't need to do anything at all, and you'll never hear it again. But now, here's Mike Mearls and Dr. Christopher Robichaud. Dun, dun, dun. Welcome one and all. America has been playing a game for over 200 years now, a game called the Constitution. America has been so good at playing this game that it is one of the oldest continuous democracies on the planet. But what if it is time for America to play a new game? What if the beloved Constitution of 1787 is no longer serving the needs of the American people? What might a new game, a new constitution look like? That is the question we are gathering here to discuss. Now, this question is obviously political, but I'm hoping that the question is so weird and outside the current dynamics as to be interesting to people across the partisan spectrum. My name is Ben Riggs. I am a historian and a junior high teacher in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And with me are two people I am hoping can shed some light on this question. First, we have Professor Christopher Robichaud, who I will call Chris from now on. He is from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and has a resume that would make any academic blush with envy. But by my lights, the most interesting part is his creation of simulations for professionals to explore ethical decision-making. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
Thank you. And also joining us is Mike Mearls. Mike Mearls is the co-designer of the best-selling version of Dungeons & Dragons ever created. And if we are going to talk about creating a game for America to play, he certainly seems like a man you'd want in that room. Welcome again, Mike.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this. This is a really interesting discussion.
So all that said, Chris, in an earlier email, you said you expressed some hesitations about a new constitution. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
So can you tell me all about that? I'd love to hear it.
Okay, great. So again, Ben, thank you. Mike, it's an honor, honestly, to be sharing this with you. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since the 1980s, and your game design has just been phenomenal for decades. So it's really, truly a privilege. Ben, I'll keep it short. I'm going to say 3 reasons why I'm a little bit worried. I'm going to try not to be a professor. I'm going to try to keep it short. Say 3 things why I'm a little bit worried. Just consider them like pebbles in the pond that we can follow the ripples if we want, or we can just be like, nah, that's not interesting. The first is this. I've been reading my colleague Jill Lepore. She's a historian at Harvard, reading her recent book, We the People, I'm not going to pretend I'm all the way through it. It's 700 plus pages. Love Jill, but those are the size of her books. And she makes this really compelling argument that we've made a mistake about the Constitution insofar as we've failed to do what the founders imagined that we would be doing on a regular basis, and that's amending it. And she is part of or the lead of a project, the Constitutional Amendment Project, where she has tracked down every single attempted amendment to the Constitution. There have been over 10,000 attempted amendments to the Constitution. We have 27, 28 by some people's life, 27 by others, depending on what you think of where the standing is of the Equal Rights Act. Equal Rights Amendment. But the point is, the founders, I'm summarizing a lot of content, so please read the book. But I think the spirit of what she would be saying is, if the founders were to time travel into the future and be like, so how's it going? And we're like, awesome, we've kept the Constitution. They'd be like, great. They're like, well, how many times did you amend it? And we said 27 times. They'd be like, what are you talking about? That's not, we built in an amendment process so that you could continue to work this to meet the ongoing needs of an evolving country. So my first, taking the spirit of that, and what I'm hoping is, a reasonable understanding of what the founders had in mind. My preference would be, let's explore amendments. Let's try to recapture the spirit that it was meant to, treating the Constitution with respect, but not as so sacred that you have to sort of preserve it in whatever it is and not touch it. Let's go that strategy first. So that's my first thing. The second is, I teach at the Kennedy School of Government. I teach international students. And some of them that I've taught over the years have come from countries that have thrown out their government. I mean, not just a government, but the order of things, and rebuilt it. Almost never is that a peaceful process. That almost always comes with blood. And so in general, I don't want to straw man it, it doesn't have to, but in general, I'm hesitant about what would actually contextually have to be taking place.
Well, Thomas Jefferson agrees with you on that point, but please continue.
Yeah, I was going to say, to throw out the Constitution and start again. I'm like, do we really want to actually go through the process that would lead to that? My last one is sort of my bread and butter stuff, which is I think that many, not all, but many of the problems that we currently are experiencing, and we're pointing to things like the Constitution and saying it's your fault, Constitution. Yeah, I think it's more cultural than that. I think you can, no matter how good, we have examples of amazingly modern, relatively speaking, constitutions. The Indian Constitution, the South African Constitution, constitutions coming out of apartheid, constitutions coming out of colonialism. They're rich, they're robust, they're great. We're still seeing in these countries backsliding. We're still seeing grabs for power. I believe, to use the game analogy, you can only legalize so much. If you have people come to the table and they're just not interested in having a good time for all the rules in the world for your game is not going to change that. And I think similarly I would want to diagnose that one of our problems is cultural, and it's not going to be fixed one way or another with the best Constitution you could write is not going to fix that. Those are my three opening thoughts.
Mike, do you mind if I take a couple quick stabs here?
Go for it.
All right. So point one, amendments. I would be totally fine if it turned out that we could handle our current problems with amendments. I am skeptical of that because, and point three, I think, is your strongest point by far. It is a thing that is both obviously true and very difficult to change and to work around. You're correct in that if we're playing a game with people that don't want to play this game at all and instead want to play, I don't know, darts, it doesn't matter how good the rules of a new Constitution are or how good that game is. You're right. If they want to play darts and we want to play the game called Constitution, that is just not going to work out. Amendments, again, I think it might be insufficient to the scope of our current problems, but again, I think problem three might trump problem one, and prevent the cultural problem might prevent amendments being used to fix the Constitution. And as far as I totally agree that often changing the current order is a bloody process. I would hope in my dream of dreams that a discussion in the country of what a new constitution would be like would replace the blood. That's what I would hope. I do not have a immediate historical example, but I have lots of historical examples of the breaking of constitutional orders. And the breaking of constitutional orders looks to me like what is happening now. And once a constitutional order is broken, it is very difficult to restore it. Unless you can think of an example. Like, I keep thinking of the Roman Empire, which may not be a good example. And I keep thinking of the French Revolution. But it seems like once you have someone
that was very bloody.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah.
But like I said, my goal here would be to replace the blood. And again, if I were a deity here, I would wave a wand and everything would be kind of fine already. So I would say I hear everything you're saying, and that those are, again, point 2 and 3. Point 3 I think is very significant. Point 2 I don't feel in control of. I feel like the current order is being broken. I feel like it's difficult to restore, if not impossible to restore it. So then what do you do? Well, I think you try and come up with a new set of rules. But I have talked way more. I've talked more in the past 10 minutes than I was planning to talk in 60 minutes. Mike, do you want to say anything to this?
Yeah, so the not to just turn this into a discussion about role-playing games, but to do that anyway. I think that this idea that culturally we just like it's impossible for us to get along. I think if that is really the case, then yeah, no rule of law can force people who want to fight to stop fighting, right? Like rules, laws, these are all social constructs that only have as much meaning as we put into them. And so if it is completely intractable, then you can't solve this with a new constitution unless you first go through the process of some sort of, civil war, whatever, sundering, breaking apart things. But I guess, Ben, I don't want to be the annoying optimist, but maybe I'm just going to be. I don't know if I agree that things are so bad that like the existing mechanisms within the Constitution can't handle it. I mean, because it's interesting, like Chris, you brought up, you studied the amendments, and like you'd expect to be a lot more, because yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like when I was looking through, I read the Constitution, while making dinner. And I also did the thing which I guess as a college professor you wouldn't appreciate, or but as a teacher you would not appreciate. I asked not ChatGPT. I asked Claude, what do you think? But it was interesting how the first thing it picked up on was the idea of the amendment system. If you were to look at the Constitution as a game, this is a game that tells you how to change it to keep everybody happy, right? And that is like such a role-playing game thing, right? Like if you're playing Magic the Gathering competitively, you're not going to, in the middle of the match, decide to start changing the rules. But in a more social game, like tabletop role-playing game, or if I'm playing a game of Commander that's very more casual, if I'm playing a miniatures war game where we're just kind of messing around with our models, that I didn't know that worked that way, or I thought it did this, whatever. It's much more of a conversation than an actual set of rules. And I think it does strike me as I was looking through and reading it. Now, Claude didn't tell me this. Like I was kind of pulling out some highlights. But when I was reading through it, it is interesting to see how much of an artifact it is of its time. It talks about letters of marque, and I'm like, can I go get a letter of marque? Like that's awesome, right? I'd love to have a letter of marque. I don't know if I'd ever use it, but I'd just like to have one. But we don't see anything that reflects a lot of our modern lives, right? Corporations, right? The text is clearly written from the perspective of the people writing this document expect to essentially be directly themselves or their descendants who would be much like them to be the ones executing these laws, right? Running it. And so when you see ideas like of corporations, like probably not even a concept of them existed in terms of how they exist today, and that impact on how a government would function within these rules. And it is funny if you think of this purely as a piece of game design. Well, you have the corporation piece. Now you have global communication at instant speed. What does that mean for a document that says you cannot accept a title from a noble of a foreign country, right? Like, okay, so what does that mean? And you get it what they're driving at, right? They don't want someone they don't want the King of England declaring someone in Vermont that you're the Duke of Vermont now, and now you get stuff for me. Well, okay, now we're pulling apart the Union, right? So thinking about the big picture elements of the document and thinking, well, how would you modernize those, presumably through an amendment process, to anticipate there are things that are coming into being that we cannot possibly anticipate. Therefore, it's up to you. And that's what I loved about reading it, was how much of it was like, go collect taxes. I don't know. You'll figure it out. You're smart. But it is such and I think it might be, to me, like the big problem of our time in some ways, of when you think of like East versus West, right? The struggle of the 20th century, right? Central planning versus market economics, right? Where it's, the information lives at the periphery and everything is driven by the local expert. We're kind of stuck in this weird thing where we sort of, I think in the early 21st century, formed a monoculture and then realized we didn't actually want that. But we're stuck in the monoculture, right? And that's what defines everything we want. And I think that's what I see, Ben. Like when you're talking about things like falling apart, I see that much more in like the social fabric, in terms of, we have all these people stuck on the internet talking to each other, and they'd probably be happier if they couldn't. Like if they didn't know what everyone else was doing, because so much of this document is like, okay, you're off in South Carolina, you're just going to do whatever you want within these bounds. Okay, you can't go make treaties with other countries, and states can't like start charging taxes on stuff going across state lines, but otherwise do whatever you want. Like I think there's even a thing where it's like, oh, you'll send representatives based on, I don't know, you'll probably have some sort of representative body, the largest of those bodies, because maybe you'll have more than one, I don't know. We'll use that as the template for picking stuff, right? Like it's just, but it's brilliant, because I think that's what in some ways we need more of in the modern world, like this decentralization, because that's very much where we exist, right? Like we have so much ability to determine what communities we want to be a part of, what information we want to consume. And this idea that I think is a holdover from the 20th century, that that we can have this very like, hey, it's all one culture, we're all coming together. Radio, then television, everything is just it's all one, right? And I think now we're finding we have gone too far. That there is real value, especially in the United States, to being able to say, I don't like it here, I am going to move. Right? I don't like the politics here. I don't like the climate. I don't like how things are run. I am going to move to a different state where things are different, and that's how I will live. Because to me, that's the wild thing about the United States. I mean, I can't, Chris, you'd know this far better than I would, but like, I can't, is there any other, like this idea of like mobility? Like, does any other country, like, obviously in modern times, like you can, if you're in the EU, you can move around and stuff. But it feels like that is such a signature, like, feature of the United States structurally. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, or if that makes any sense, or.
I'm a big fan of voting with your feet. I tell a lot of my international students that they certainly can't just stay in Cambridge, Massachusetts and get a sense of what America is like. And one of the amazing things about this country is you can travel within the United States, just the continental United States, and get completely different cultures and completely different experiences. And I think that pluralism adds to our richness and our greatness, is the fact that there's so much variety on how you can live. Not everyone is mobile, of course, and so we need to, I need to remember that. But like in general, the idea that there's going to be a place in the country, if you can get there, there's going to be a place in the country that speaks to you. I think though the one nuance I may want to make is I agree up to a point. I think we're all of an age where we remember the promise of the 90s. You turn your computer on, here's this internet's, the webs, and you're like, oh my God, we're finally going to be one great connected world. Isn't that fantastic? And yeah, wow. I mean, I joke with some of my friends. I'm like, I've been teaching at the Kennedy School since across the street they were inventing Facebook. Who knew at the time that it would help undermine democracy? But that's the way that these things sort of turn out, It seemed like a cool idea at the time. So the point is we just don't know, So on the one hand, I agree that, we got the interconnected global world that we wanted, and we sort of balked. My only concern in the United States context is us swinging the pendulum too far in the other direction. I worry that part of what's happened is we've lost a sense of a common good, of a shared good that somehow connects the diversity that we've been talking about. That somehow we can say with a straight face and without an asterisk and without apology that there's something it is to be an American, despite all of our differences. And there's a notion of a common good that we all are partaking in. I don't want us to become so siloed in our own worlds. And I'm not hearing you say this, Mike. I'm just sort of like that we lose the capacity for that. One of my concerns with modern technology is it easily allows you, speaking about the internet, it easily allows us to perhaps become so unbelievably siloed, echo chambered, that we lose any sense whatsoever. I mean, in the role-playing world, there's Twitter Dungeons and Dragons, and then there's the people who play Dungeons and Dragons. And I regularly have to remind people that the people talking about Dungeons and Dragons online is a very small subset of the people who play Dungeons and Dragons. And if you mistake the one for the other, you'll be getting a misrepresentation of all the wonderful diversity of people who find joy in this kind of game. And I think that that's a trap that a lot of us have fallen into. We get in this world and we think that we've reached its edge. So long story short, yes to we saw the one great big world and we're like, oh. But on the other side, I think we might have run in the other direction now where we're trapped and have lost a sense of any kind of common good or common culture that we can pursue together. Yeah.
Well, and then how much do you think the Constitution as a document, because obviously when it was written, we didn't have this idea of corporations, especially the scale, which we have today. That to me felt like the number one thing. If I was just asked, oh, as a game designer, what's the hole you see? And I would immediately say that's the problem I see. We have a clear acknowledgement in the document of the threat potentially posed by foreign governments, but we don't see any concept of the idea, of a corporation, right? Which is we've seen obviously, things like environmental production regulations, consumer protections, that simply couldn't happen. I could not corner the Apple market, it just was impossible, physically impossible, right? But now I can pull together the capital, the communication network, the resources to fundamentally own a market and then use that, essentially turn that power against the government, right? I can just pour money into campaigns. I can buy ads, this document is completely silent on, right? I don't think there's even any sense of how that would function. And if it might be, I would say that might be the weak point in the Constitution is you're kind of kicking everything down the can, let the locals deal with it. But you're ignoring the potential for that process to be suborned and then turned against the actual structure itself within itself.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the Constitution was written by a very specific group, and they were pragmatists. They wanted to get it passed, right? They wanted to get it passed. So we get the damnable compromises like the 3/5 compromise. I don't think they envisioned that leading to a major civil war that came very close to ending the country, but of course it did. They didn't have anything on their radar they honestly, I don't think they had global economics really on their radar. And by that, I just mean an interconnected economy to the extent that we have now. Obviously, there was trade with other countries across the seas, but they didn't have any of that. But to me, this is just why the amendment process should be so attractive. Our Supreme Court, for instance, has decided over several rulings now over many years that as written, the spending of money by individuals and by corporations is a kind of speech, a kind of free speech. All right, well, so we're not going to resolve this, but it's not stopping us from writing an amendment, right, that says we're going to take a certain kind of speech, election spending, and we're going to say that there's going to be an upper bound to that. That's the kind of amendment that our founders probably would be like, why did you need this? We'll be like, let me tell you about Apple, right? Let me tell you about Elon Musk, right? Let me tell you about one person shouldn't be able to put that much money into it, but we can do that. That's not beyond the pale of an amendment that you think that could garner bipartisan support. Anyways, I also think our founders and our founders were also quite wealthy, all things considered. And so I don't think on their radar was I mean, they were all property, right? I mean, I don't think on their radar was the concern. I'm not overly criticizing, but I think it's important. Like they were all wealthy, like the concern of living in an impoverished life. And so speaking of economics, like this would be a more radical amendment, but an amendment that guaranteed everyone something like a basic level of sustenance. How we want to, I can imagine some of my economics friends right now would be like, they'd just be taking me and shaking me like, do you understand what that would do? And I'd be like, I get it. But like, if a constitution is supposed to be aspirational, I don't think it's a bad idea to say we believe that everyone should have a bare minimum, like, lifestyle. Like that could be an amendment. We're not anywhere near that one though.
That's interesting too, because you think that in that time period, the idea of, an individual, unless you were wealthy, you were very much like involved in the, producing the elements that allowed you to survive from a day-to-day basis, right? Like you didn't, like, I'd say where I am like completely sundered from any aspect of how my food's made, right? I had to make dinner tonight. So I went to Trader Joe's and bought a bag of frozen French fries and a package of beef patties to make cheeseburgers. Like I had nothing. Like there was, if Trader Joe's wasn't there, I starved, right? Like, but like now, like if we go back, whatever, 250 years, right? I think that's another thing that would probably be very different in terms of just. I mean, I might be completely misremembering my history, but I imagine the gap between like. Look, if you can work hard and and you're willing to put in the time, like you can get by, versus today where, oh no, you can and you still can't get by. Like literally, in the Northwest, we have a massive housing problem, right? Where you literally have people who cannot afford an apartment because it's just not, and the election just this Tuesday, right? I mean, was it the top issue was cost of living, right? I mean, I think across the board, and that I imagine would probably be kind of alien to the back in the late 18th century.
And this to me speaks to the challenge of the moment, because you're exactly right. Like, I do think commitment to democracy, which our Constitution tries to capture, cannot ever be assumed generation by generation. And I don't think it's unreasonable for people to say, if you want me to buy into this project, you need to convince me that there's something to it. I don't need to get everything. And I do feel that a lot of people in this country, one of the moments that we're in right now, they felt betrayed by the system, and not merely like, my team didn't win this election, but I come from rural Northeast Ohio. There's a lot of people there that have been struggling since the 90s. They view the 90s, in fact, as the time when, in their view, and not entirely wrong, there was a decision made that did not take their long-term livelihood into consideration. And it has been downhill ever since. And it has been Walmart's taking over mom and pop stores. It has been drug addiction. It has been no self-worth found in work, no work available. And then to say, yeah, but you got to believe in democracy and you got to buy into the project. And the thought is, well, but why? You're not delivering anything. The project the game you're playing, I'm not even a player at the table. I'm at the kids' table next door. You're playing the game and you're throwing me the dice that you're not using anymore to play whatever game I want. Maybe it's a terrible analogy, but I think it sort of speaks to the feelings that some people have. So to the extent that we allow that to continue, I feel that we could craft, again, I'm going back to the point, we can craft the most beautiful constitution in the world unless it addresses things like this. I do feel a lot of people rightfully feel betrayed in the current state of things. And we're seeing the effects of this. You're right, Mike. I mean, we are going to keep having, I predict that we will just keep having elections that keep swinging back and forth. It just keep throwing out whoever's there and putting it. And what we're learning more and more is it just doesn't matter who the new person is, right? You want a guy that says, I'm just going to be the king. Well, we're voting for you because we're desperate. The next guy's like, I'm going to create a Marxist utopia in the center of capitalism of the world. Great. I mean, I'm saying this with some jest, but like, the point is, folks are just like, whatever, just like change, fix things. I can't feed myself anymore. And I'm working, 80 hours a week. Yeah.
And I think that's where I find it really interesting when you look at the online discussion, to your earlier point about like, okay, like Twitter or whatever doesn't reflect the reality. I feel like in this election this past week fits this perfectly, where you look at the exit polling, you look at the data, people consistently, overwhelmingly saying it's cost of living, it's cost of living. And then I can go on Substack and all I see is, oh, this is clearly an endorsement of whatever, like social, or no, it's a rebuke of this, or no, actually it's an endorsement of this, even though no one voted for it, they secretly actually like it, right? Like, and it's just like, in some ways it's so deeply frustrating because we can argue about social, trying to kind of put it, issues around identity and race. It's very easy to get people engaged on that. And I think that might be what we are fundamentally seeing broken in our ability to engage with each other, is that we have a media ecosystem now that's driven by outrage. But we have no constructive outlet for that. In theory, that's voting. But when you have a system that's just sustained by anger and provocation, how do you then channel that fruitfully when we really get down to it? It is a problem of economics, what's motivating votes, but we don't see people engaging with it. I was listening to a podcast just yesterday about economics, whatever the current economic condition, and they have an economist on, and she's talking about the jobs report and how we've shifted from being worried about inflation to now jobs. And other than economics wonks who want to talk about that stuff, no one's talking about that, right? I'm sure, like, I have my web browser open here, and I was just trying to find the GDP of France in 1785 in today's dollars, because I wanted to see, is Elon Musk richer than all of France when the Constitution was written, right? But if I go to, like, let's just say I'm going to go somewhere like the BBC, which is not even like a fringe media thing. It's just it's the top stories about climate change. It's about Elon Musk and his money. Like, I just feel like when you look at all these news stories, I think one of our problems is these are fundamentally disconnected from what's actually worrying people. And they're very connected to the media ecosystem and what people in the media are talking about, but I don't think they're connected to the average person just trying to get by.
And one place where we can bring this to constitutional reform, which was not throwing it out, is, and again, this is not a silver bullet. None of this is a silver bullet, but just to this point is, I do feel part of what you're describing, Mike, a part of what you're describing is the failure of the representational system, right? People don't feel like the people representing them are actually representing them. And, my colleague, Danielle Allen, who's at the Kennedy School and at Harvard College, she's written a lot about, it's a simple fix in the grand scheme of things that could do wonders, which is expanding the seats in the House of Representatives. I mean, right now, it's kind of, I forget when the last time this was done, but way too long ago. The Constitution, talking about what they envisioned that House as having representatives that were quite proximate to the people that they were representing, given the numbers, which was not at the time what it is now. But that's long gone. I mean, I'm not going to make up numbers, but if we look online, we can see on average what one congressional representative, how many people they represent. And it's too big of a number. There's no way for that person to have the kind of, senators are allowed to be that way, right? But that's why you have a House. So I can understand, even at the structural level, like someone going like, where's my voice represented? It's not in the Senate. It's not in the federal government writ large. I mean, in the executive. The House was supposed to be the place where that takes place. And all we're talking about is how we can play the game of +5. How we can carve things up even more for, I get 2 more seats, you lose 2 more seats, and this is going to be the thing. And look, I get the politics. I teach at school politics, but I'm like, people don't feel represented anymore. Can we talk about that problem? Like, they don't feel like represented. Yeah.
No, and that's a great point. The entire redistricting, California having with a Prop 50, and maybe that's like the first point of attack I, as a game designer, would say is like, okay, make that number of voters per rep equal to the largest number necessary to make gerrymandering impossible or incredibly difficult or not relevant. And this is the thing that I think is interesting to about the context of it. We have the technology that, in theory, we could have. I'm going to throw a number out there, and you're going to tell me this is crazy, but I'm going to intentionally do something crazy. 1 representative for every 3,000 people. Now, we probably couldn't have any meaningful, like, we all get camera time as a rep to talk, but we could handle the voting, we could handle the communication. Like, there's a lot of structural stuff that, because of modern technology, you can herd a fleet of cats. That's what we have, 386 million people in the United States. I think that's about right. So we go down to 3,000. That's like 3,386,000. That's actually not so bad. That's probably what. Okay, I'm gonna actually do the math right here.
Well, what I'm doing in my head is I'm like, well, we're gonna need bigger buildings, but the good news is there seems to be a vibe to destroy the buildings that exist and rebuild new ones.
Yeah.
So let's just embrace the mood. But right, like I don't know what the number would be, but surely we can do better than what we're doing right now. And that kind of intervention, I would also do an amendment against gerrymandering as well. Like these are the sorts of structural games that truly disenfranchise people. Ohio, for instance, Ohio's a purple state that leans red. Right. The Ohio people have regularly said, we don't want all this gerrymandering. The people have said that, but their representatives of Ohio keep playing the game. And so there's just so many levels of just like two middle fingers up to everyone who's part of this. And I think good faith interventions like this would at least show, look, we hear that. We need to do better at capturing the voice of the people.
Mike, my math says that there'd be 113,333 reps if everyone had one. If it was
That's like Star Wars, right? That's like the Senate, and like that'd be a very big chamber.
But you can imagine a world. Okay, so now this is where I'm going to be maybe achingly optimistic. But you can imagine a world in which we do have the technology where if we really wanted to make that happen, we could make that happen. Right, like between interconnectivity. Now we would have to give up some things like the ability to deliver a live speech like in real time, as opposed to something recorded or something that is, I'm going to say it, but like an AI moderated. Like, okay, I have all this information. I could use an AI to organize it and show me what this person said, show me what that person said. It would be a weird thing where like it would be at such a scale that I think the idea of real time, like we're all in one room arguing, probably goes away. But on the other hand, you would have incredible access in terms of like, in my town alone here in Washington State, my city I live in, we'd have like 13, 15 reps. Like, that's incredible. Like, you couldn't help but feel connected. It's probably someone who lives in your neighborhood who is your rep. And then so when I'm upset about something, I can just go knock on their door and complain. And I think that is, as I think about it, that does feel like the thing which, we have, I feel like we have this concurrent thing where at the national level, we feel more disconnected than ever. But at the local level, like I think there's like an even greater sense of disconnection because our media is so global now. Like we've all been jammed into this monoculture. And so it is much easier for me to learn about what's happening in the New York mayor election than it is for me to learn even the Seattle mayor election. Like I have not, like, I'm pretty sure I know who won, but I have not had a single news story about it come up in my feed, because it's just not national news. Like it's not something that people found interesting. So I know more about Zoran Memdani than I do about any of the candidates. I know more about him than I know about Bruce Harrell, who was the mayor of Seattle and I think still is. I think he won, but I don't know for sure. And that's to me really weird and bizarre and interesting. Like that I would have to like, and that's not even my city. Like I live in a suburb of Seattle. But and I wonder how much of it that I'm actually going to Google it right now. Is this guy still there? Google seems to think he is.
While you're Googling, I'll just add that this too is like we have freedom of the press amendment wise, but we didn't imagine certain things. Like I go back and forth about this, but I work with a lot of Neiman fellows here who are all journalists, and the story that you're telling, Mike, is also an economic story, right? With the past 20 to 30 years has wiped out newsrooms, and where that has the brunt of that has been in local news reporting, local news journalism, right? It's all gone. There's no clicks in it as much anymore. It's just very hard to sustain. So you lose the investigative reporters, you lose the local news investigation. I remember we probably all grew up where like local news investigation, that was a big deal. Like we're like, who stepped in it this week? Which companies like bilking customer, whatever. That's all gone. It's all gone. So it breaks my heart when you said that, but I know how true it is. And I don't think it's merely like not interest. I just think that there's not any reporters out there anymore. And that there's an economic story behind that as well, which is really tragic, because we should be more connected to what's going on. We should know more about I should know more about the Somerville mayor who just got elected than I do about the mayor of New York City. And yet, Right.
Yeah, exactly. The because it does feel like that's the if I was to like be to bend to your position of like, okay, we need to get rid of it. That is like the angle of attack I see that where it starts to make sense, where the Constitution is very much written assuming that the states are this fractious bunch that are like they're brought together, but they each kind of want to do their own thing. At least that's the reading it on it, and that seems to be where culturally we have gone very much the opposite direction, right? Where like and I do agree, there's a lot of value in that, saying look, this identity and being citizen of the United States, an American, but has this idea, especially the cultural side of it, news politics, gone too national, where like we are so fixated on the national elections that we have lost track of what's going on locally and then how we can then mirror that nationally. We're like, okay, this is a really important local issue. How do we then make effective national legislation to either protect our local concerns or advance them? And where I think now we see much more, no, if the issue is not a national spinning issue. I mean, that's why Mamdani is like, okay, he's of interest. Well, he's a socialist, and whatever that means when you hear the word socialist. And of course, he got, as mayor of New York, he is the standard bearer for how everything's going to change nationally, and it's a massive sweeping tide and change, right? Like every national election is depicted as this like incredible, like, nope, now we are 100% Republican. Trump won, so therefore the United States is Trump land. That is exactly, everything is maxed out in what he believes, and then he loses, and it's a reputation, nothing, never again will we ever see Trump. And it's just like there's almost like this desire and this narrative for it to end. Like we just want the story to be done, right? And it's like that's not how it works. Right? That's not how any of this works. And I worry that we have this desire for like an ending, like everything could just be finally settled. And I think so much of the issues that divide us, like we have this false belief that, I mean, look at what happened with abortion, right? We have abortion rights, and then Roe v. Wade gets overturned. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Like it's gonna get re-implemented, right? Like this is just how it works. Like it's just there isn't an end point, and I think that's what we're maybe struggling with, is this idea that we can finish things and like we have the answer and it's done. And I worry that people are so desperate to just be given a final answer that they don't want to engage with the system, if that makes any sense. Like, no, we voted and that's it. It's done. I don't want to think about this anymore. I want to just know that we won and I don't have to worry about it. And I think that we're just like collectively asking people to take on so much cognitively. Like maybe there was a lot of value in like, hey, I live here in my corner of New Hampshire and all I worry about is the apple harvest. Like that's all I worry about. I don't know what's going on in New York City, right? Like, because this is all I worry about are the things right near me, and that we're just overwhelming people, and the system needs to adapt to that.
Mike, you remind me of something when you said, we just want to be done. We just over and done with. We've won. Like to me, this is, and Ben, you're the historian here of the group. So, you probably will want to speak more to this than as I stumble through it. But when I teach when I teach my students about tolerance, about the tradition of tolerance, I say that, we forget that the founding of this country came from a bunch of people who just left a lot of religious wars, where for many, many years, the attitude was, well, we just need to get this one war done and it'll be the complete annihilation of the Catholics, or it'll be the complete annihilation of the Protestants. And eventually folks realized you're never going to have the total victory. You're just never going to have the total victory. And so the American project in part was born out of that begrudging realization that you're never going to have total victory over your neighbors, And so you have to learn how to live with them. I feel like we've entered a place now where there is a new assumption that you can get total victory. I do, if I may put on my political hat for a minute, I do think right now that the current federal government is trying to attain total victory. It's never going to. And if progressives sweep everything the next time, they're never going to attain total victory. Some of my students believe that there was a kind of manifest destiny in the demographics, that eventually there'll just be enough people who were younger or people of color or whatever their story was, where you weren't going to have to do politics anymore. You weren't going to have to find disagreement because eventually we would just totally win. And I always found that amusing. But now no one believes that, right? Because of course the demographics are doing what folks thought the demographics would do. I wish we could all, if I were to say one thing about our country right now, I wish we would all remember that there's no total victory. It's never going to be done, to Mike's point. And so we've got to learn how to live with each other. And we're not going to succeed at doing that well if we keep trying to attain total victory in a game in which we're virtually guaranteed that there's not going to be total victory. That's a cultural move I wish we could make.
Well, I wonder if we're getting there a little bit. When Trump went after, was it Jimmy Kimmel?
Yeah.
And you did see people on the right coming out and saying, well, what happens when this gets turned on us? Now, the dark scenario is when it won't be turned on us because we won't have another election. But I mean, we just saw this past week, decisive break, against Trump, right? His candidates lost across the board. I think it was like a clean sweep of every race that had any sort of national implications to the Democrats, to the left. And I feel like, and again, maybe this is me being too optimistic, Ben, but I do feel like that when Trump there are some norms that people have let Trump get away with trampling. But I feel like there are, especially in the past few months where you see some of the things he's done, there has been a pushback against that. When we saw, what was his name? He had the, was it Tucker Carlson had a guest? I can't remember who it was, but he had been tied up in anti-Semitism. And now we're seeing a backlash against that. And I do think that the challenge we may have is we might have people buying into this idea, we won, it's over, versus people realizing, no, this is going to keep going. There's going to be ups and downs. And Chris, to your earlier point, we are definitely living in an era where it's like, give me not the people who are in charge. Okay, don't like them. Give me not. That's just what people keep voting for. So whoever is not in charge, put them in charge, because I think people are groping for someone to address the immediate problems they're facing and still not seeing that play out.
Yeah, one of the things I really do love about this country is we are ungovernable at times. we're really a bunch of pirates on a pirate ship. I mean, it's just a huge country, and it's I mean, it can be frustrating at times, but it's just not in our cultural DNA for the one ring to rule us all kind of thing. And so I think you're right, Mike. And again, I have moments where I'm like Ben, where I'm like, oh my God, it's over. But I also have quite optimistic moments too. And, my optimistic moments, I'm like, it's just we just don't have the appetite for falling in line behind anyone. And this country seems to have a strong allergy whenever people try to impose that. And the left has been the target of that, and rightly so at times. It's overstepped its bound and said, you all must do this. No, we're not going to. But the right is doing that now a little bit too. And folks are like, actually, no. We're pirates. We're ungovernable at times, and that may save us in a sense. My more optimistic moments, I like the fact that we are down deep rebels through and through. That's the founding of our country. Is that
Yeah, we don't like being told what to do, even though sometimes that leads to bad outcomes. But I think in the long term, it because it naturally means no one ever can win. Right. Get that final, like, I am fully in charge, because there is always that impulse to push back. I'm a big sports fan, and I grew up in New England, so a big Patriots fan. And I always remember in 2001, the Patriots won their first Super Bowl, big underdogs. They won. Everyone loved the New England Patriots. When the Patriots won their third Super Bowl, everyone hates the New England Patriots, right? Nobody wants to see those jerks win again, right? And I just think that is something that is really deep down in the American character. And I just think it's something that, as long as we don't lose that, as long as we don't, when we look at a struggle, as long as our eye goes toward the underdog and goes, I kind of identify with that guy. Like, that's the one I identify with. The person is on the outside. The person getting pushed around. Because I think that is kind of the power of America, is like, we all feel like outsiders to some extent, right? Like, we all feel that the odds are stacked against us, and so on. And I think that's naturally where our sympathies go. And I think as long as culturally we still get that, and I don't know if that just becomes, from our, immigrants coming over, people, this idea of the upward mobility and all that stuff. But I do feel like that's a real corrective, and And I think there is also a tendency, and I'll say this very much about Trump. Like I think he overestimates why, or at least doesn't quite grasp like why people vote for him, right? Like when you look at the election 2024, I felt that was very clearly a repudiation of Biden's inability to get a handle on inflation, right? Costs were rising too quickly, and Trump jumped on that and then immediately threw it aside to start, with immigration, and I get that's also a topic that's controversial, but there's a lot of support for it, and and things like that in terms of but I think he's overplayed his hand. I think that's just naturally what happens here in the United States is inevitably if someone gets a lot of momentum, they overplay their hand. I mean, I remember seeing this growing up. I grew up in the 80s, so I lived through saw Reagan for both terms and then saw Bush come in, and this idea, the Reagan elections. I mean, we're used to now every election being like, okay, it's 3 days after the election.
I remember 84, he wins 49 states. Mondale wins his state.
It's just, or like, 88, Dukakis shows up in the tank and it's like, nope, he's losing. Like, no one's voting for this guy, right? Like, and but then, in 92, suddenly Clinton comes in and it's like, no, it's Democrats forever, right? Like, it's like, this is it. Everyone loves Bill Clinton. And, so I think there's always a tendency for the party that's ascendant to overplay their hand, to think, no, we don't have to worry about it. We won yesterday, so we're gonna win tomorrow, and now we get to do whatever we want. And
and you've got to do it smart. I actually, speaking of like disruptions, like Trump sometimes, in my view, has the right thought, which is, for instance, to come in and say, like, you need a disruptor to come in and say, the federal bureaucracy is absurd. And it's not helping anyone. It's not helping anyone. And someone needs to come in here and throw some elbows around and break some eggs. That, honestly, my opinion, right thought. Execution of that by putting a tech billionaire in charge and with all the horrific. You don't even, no one needs to take my word for it. Who am I, right? But the fact that they kept firing people and then having to rehire them shows just how how ridiculous the execution of that sort of thing was. The idea of sort of throwing elbows around on the global stage and saying, look, status quo is not going to last anymore. Let's talk about other countries paying more into their defense and things like that. Look, I can get behind it. But the execution, which I'm just going to tear up the hell out of everything and sink entire global businesses because I woke up one terrible execution. So you gotta, we have a spirit of disruption, but we also need to complement that as game players, right? You need strategy too, and you need tactics after the strategy, or else it's just a mess.
Yeah, maybe in an era where AI data centers need more energy than ever, shutting down all green energy just on principle. Yeah. But I just don't like it, right? Like maybe that's not the best move right now.
Yeah, so.
Well, that seems like a somewhat logical place to begin winding down, actually. I would say, is there anything I want to address?
But I have a question for you. Is your new government parliamentary? I mean, this is one of the big things that people say is that we sort of got there first in the modern era, and boy, we have a clunky division of labor here. And most people are like minimally make it a parliament so that when people are talking to the prime minister, they know that when people are talking to the leader of the country, they know that they have the backing of the sort of legislative black. We're weird insofar as whenever right now that's not the case, but whenever we have a divided government, the president is sort of there, but always in other countries, thoughts are like, yeah, but what happens when they have to go back to Congress and parliamentary system does seem to lend itself to a more coherent form of democracy, I might say.
I mean, ever since I had a tour of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, and I had a Canadian lawyer explain to me the Canadian system of government, I've been like, oh, it makes so much more sense. and yet, if you are sitting
but
around...
you need THACO before, right? You need THACO before you get D20. You need THACO before you get D20. Someone had to come up with it.
It's true. It's true. But I also have of late thought to myself, if you were going to design a government to foil autocracy and dictatorship, maybe it is the American system of government where a tiny little minority in Congress can hold things. I shouldn't say a tiny minority, but where because you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, you can tie everything up. You know, who's going to pay for the Gestapo if you can't get a bill through Congress? But that is a thought that I've only had lately. Yeah, for fear of going over, I won't say anything else on anything. But I'll just say thank you both very much. I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna send you both audio and video of this just so you can see it and look at it. I'm gonna take it and look at it and kind of process things. Mike, I'll tell you, my gut instinct is that I think this went really, really well. Because when you said what is my government like, I have no idea. Like I am looking for freaky, weird ideas. Like, oh yeah, 1 rep per 3,000 people. Like that's the kind of thing that would get someone's attention and say, what could American government be like that? Is that what it should be like? You know, how do we play test this? You know, I don't want to engage in political violence. I just want to play that game.